Alright, so again, right where yesterday left off, we are starting with the corresponding angle converse. So you previously learned that if the lines were parallel, you could say the corresponding angles were congruent. It also works in reverse. If the corresponding angles are congruent, then you can state that the lines are parallel. What are your questions? Any predictions on what the next one's going to say? Alright, I'll ruin the surprise. Here you go. Now we're going to go through alternate interior angles. So last week, you learned that if two lines were parallel, then the alternate interior angles were congruent. It works in reverse. You can flip-flop them and say that if the alternate interior angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. Alright, third one we're going to look at is the alternate exterior angle converse. So again, last week you learned that if the two lines are parallel, the alternate exterior angles are congruent. It works in reverse. So if the alternate exterior angles are congruent, then you can say the lines are parallel. Now, they might try to trick you on these, so be aware. Sometimes they'll tell you that the same side interior angles are congruent. Remember, this is the only one that's different. If you know that these are congruent, that does not tell you anything about whether or not the lines are parallel, okay? They have to add to 180 in order to be parallel. All the rest of them are congruent. These are the different ones. So make sure they add to 180. If they're congruent, we don't know anything. Alright, so we just learned 4 different converses related to what we already knew about parallel lines. And remember, that if the corresponding angles are congruent, the line's parallel. The alternate interior angles are congruent, the line's parallel. The alternate exterior angles are congruent, the lines are parallel. And then this is the oddball, same side interior have to be supplementary, and then you can state that the lines are parallel. Any questions on those 4 ideas? You have to understand those before we can move on. Now, you do not need to write this down, but I just want to bring this to your attention. You can never say that 2 lines are parallel just because you think they're parallel. Alright? There's only 3 ways to know that they're parallel. The first one, it's labeled in the diagram. So you know those little arrows that we show on the parallel lines? They're like little bitty and they're usually like off to the right, pointing to the right. If you see those, you can say the lines are parallel. If the directions state that they're parallel, you can say they're parallel. Or you can use one of those 4 things that we just learned to say they're parallel. You can't just say they're parallel because they look parallel. Does that make sense? Okay, so now we're going to practice. I want you to write, or I guess just draw the pictures for A and B. And then the question says, is there enough information? So if there is, we're going to explain what the information is. If there's not, we're just going to say, no, there's not enough information. So part A, do you think there's enough information? Think of the 4 things we just learned. Are any of those shown in part A? No, there is not enough information in Part A. The only thing they're showing us here is one of the angles. We need at least two to know if the lines are parallel. Okay, you have to have corresponding, alternate interior, alternate exterior, same side interior, but just one angle doesn't show us anything. Okay, so that one's not enough information. What about Part B? Is there enough information to say that they're parallel now? I heard someone say, So yes. Why? What did they tell us? They're the same numbers, and what type of angles are they? Corresponding. Good. So yes, because corresponding angles are congruent. If you want to be a little fancier, you can name that converse. I think it was called the corresponding angle converse, if you want to write that instead, or you can just explain it in your own words that the corresponding angles are congruent. What questions do you guys have over this? All right. Check these two out. Bless you. Bless you again. All right. First part of example 4. Yes or no? Yes. Okay. Why? They're congruent. What are these? They're vertical angles. Do vertical angles tell us anything about parallel lines? No, we knew about vertical angles being congruent way before we talked about parallel lines. So although they are congruent, that's not one of the 4 special relationships that we've learned about. So do you want to change your answer?
No.
The answer is no. Not enough info. And the reason is, these are vertical angles. Vertical angles are always congruent. It has nothing to do with whether S and R are parallel. What about number 5?
Yeah.
What's the reason on number 5? What type of angles are these? Right, but they're also corresponding. So again, the corresponding angles are congruent. What are your questions on these type of examples? All right, you can put your pencils down for a little bit. We're going to do some like lightning speed when you're ready. Ready? All right, lightning speed. A. What are your first thoughts?
Yeah.
Okay? If you're saying yes, what is your reasoning? They're the same side interior angles. And it says that they're congruent. Is that something that we have learned?
No.
No. Same side interiors have to be what? They have to equal 180. We do not know if these add to 180. We know that they're the same, but we don't know anything about what they add to. So A is actually no here. We would have to know that they add to 180. So this is a no, not enough information. What about B?
Yes.
Yes. How can we say yes here? They're not corresponding. What are they? Alternate. Yes, these are alternate exteriors. Alternate exterior angles are congruent. That's enough to tell us that these are parallel lines. Good. So remember, this one is a no because for same side interior, they have to be supplementary. This one's a yes because alternate interiors are congruent. Questions on these? Again, these are like the lightning round, so you don't need to write them down. 6, what do you think? Yes. Why yes on 6? You had part of it right, I think. They're alternate interior. Alternate interiors are congruent. That's enough to say that A and B are parallel. Good. What about 7? Yes or no?
No.
No. Why not?
It is a vert something.
Good. Those are just vertical angles. Vertical angles don't tell us anything about the relationship between A and B. All right. Any questions so far? All right. Time to pick up those pencils. Draw this diagram. This one's a hair different. Instead of giving us some symbols, they're giving us some measurements. And they're saying, well, are these lines parallel? What do I know about these two angles? What type of angles are they? Same side interior. If I want to show that those lines are parallel, what do I have to show is true about the same side interior angles? They have to do what? Good. We're going to add them and see if we get 180. If we get 180, they're supplementary. We can say the lines are parallel. If it's anything but 180, the lines would not be parallel. So that's a 0, carry the 1. I'm getting 180. So what does that prove? Yeah, well, not congruent. Yes. The lines are parallel. Why? What's they? Measurements, angles. What type of angles? Same side, interior. Add to 180. Good. So the same side, interior, those are always the ones that are a little trickier. Not too bad, though. Questions? All right, here's another one. Kind of the same setup, a little different. Give you a second, and then we'll talk about how it's different than the last one. So the directions here want us to find the value of x that would make the lines parallel. Well, if these are parallel, what would these add up to? 180 because they're same side interior. So, in order for that to happen, I need to solve for the x. So I have 2x plus 4x on the same side of the equal sign. So what do I make that? They're like terms. They're on the same side of the equal sign.
Oh, so it's the triangle, right?
Just add them. It's like 2 apples plus 4 apples. Well, that's 6 apples, okay? Just add them together. Then what? Then you divide by the 6. Good. You can think of 18 divided by 6, that's 3, and then you have that 0. So if x is 30, then these would be supplementary and the lines would be parallel. Questions? All right, we're going to do one more, but you don't need to write this one. You can just watch. It's the same type of problem. What does x need to be in order for the lines to be parallel? How do you think we should start this? Okay, so you're saying that alternate exteriors, alternate exterior angles are supplementary? You want to put them together and make it equal to 180, that's what you just said. Is that something we've learned? Did we? What do we know about alternate exterior angles? They're congruent. So don't set them equal to 180. We haven't learned that, okay? We do know that in order for these lines to be parallel, those angles must be congruent. So sometimes these problems require you to actually think about what you've learned and not just set it up the same way you set up the last one. Okay? But you divide both sides by 3. 35. There you go. What are your questions on this? All right, you do have homework. It is worksheet 3-5. I will get that to you in just a second. You have the rest of the class and the weekend to finish it.